Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building Rocketarium's AIM-54 Phoenix scale air-to-air missile. And like we do with all of these kits, the first thing we need is to check and make sure all the parts are here. Inside the box we'll want to find the instructions, and be careful, they usually have stuff hidden within here, okay, like the parachute. We've got an applicator stick there, and also both vinyl and water slide decals. Okay, so I want to find the actual parts list. Here we go. Alright, and it gives us a warning here. If you're looking for things that aren't there, it's probably in the body tube. Okay, let's go ahead and just go through the list though. So we found the parachute, we found the blue decals, the silver decals, the water slide decals. Those are all here. Alright, then we've got our nose cone. This is 3D printed. Alright, and then inside here we have two sets of fins. So we have the angular forward fins and then the rectangular aft fins. It looks, oh, we've got a broken fin there. Okay, so if this happens with your kit, you can do one of two things. One is you can just fix it, which I'm going to do. But if it's really broken and not easily fixable, just send a message or give Rocketarium a call, and they can get your replacement part really quickly. Okay, and we've got some balsa trim pieces. These will go along the forward fins. And let's see here. This is a baffle spacer, so this will be used when we put the ejection baffle in. All right, as I mentioned, we've got a applicator there for glue. And then we have several sub-assemblies here. So we've got the ejection baffle kit, the motor mount kit, and then in this package here we've got some nose weight, and don't forget about that. Don't omit it either, or this thing won't fly stably. We've got an elastic shock cord and then two 1/8 inch launch lugs. So it looks like we have everything we need. So I'm going to go ahead and put most of this stuff back away, and then we will get started. Now the first thing to look at here is the body tube. And it's actually very finely laser etched to show where the fins and the launch lug should go. Okay, so there's a launch lug there, one there, forward fin, aft fin, all the way around. So just to make things a little more obvious, I'm going to write aft on the inside of the aft end of the tube there, so I don't get this turned around. Now if you find that you did turn it around about halfway through the build, you can still do this. It means you're going to have to do all the measurements and markings by hand though. So do take advantage of these. And I'm going to take a little bit of 120 grit sandpaper here. And you can use just about anything from about 80 to 150 grit. But here I'm just going to roughen the area where those etched lines are. You don't want to do this a lot, and you don't want to make the lines disappear, but this will just give a better gluing surface. Alright, then we can set this aside for the moment. And we're going to start with the motor mount assembly, and it comes with its own instructions. Just pop everything out of there. So check and make sure that you don't have stuff inside like that. So that's a spacer tube there. We will go ahead and open up this instruction sheet. Alright, so the first thing to do is simply put some glue inside this, about a 1/4 inch, or not 1/4 inch, 3/4 inch from the opening, which is just a little bit bigger, a little bit longer than my cotton swab there, so I can just kind of estimate that. Alright, and you can use a fairly healthy ring there. And then we're going to put the engine thrust ring in the opposite end, use the spacer tube here, and then just push it all the way down till it's flush, and that's going to give us a nice fillet ahead of it there. And then immediately take this out so that you don't actually glue it in, which I almost did there. Okay, so that should look like that. Okay, now we're going to measure 70 millimeters or 2 3/4 inches from the aft end. It's the end without the thrust ring. Right there. And that should be right above or right below the thrust ring there. We will find out. Okay, so take your hobby knife and just cut a 3 millimeter or about 1/8 of an inch long slit there. And if you get a lot of resistance, just alter your placement just a little hair there. Okay, and we'll pop that in, and so now you can see it's got glue on it, but there's the end of the engine clip right above the thrust ring there, and that's actually gives us maximum reliability and strength there. Okay, now we are going to measure 3/4 of an inch or 20 millimeters from the aft end. Make a mark right there. And this is going to be for the clip sleeve, so we'll just pop that on from above, and I'm going to bring it down below my mark here for just a moment. Now just cover the mark, and then we'll go ahead and put some more glue on here. Okay, and then we're just going to move this up till we see our mark at the aft end of the ring, right there. Okay, you really don't need to worry about putting additional fillets on this. Because really the only thing this ring is doing is holding the engine clip in place. It's not really a structural component that's going to be absorbing thrust. Alright, and then we've got our 2 centering rings here. The one with the very small notch, that's going to go just over the engine clip here on the forward end, like that. And then the one with the larger notch is going to go on the aft end, like this. And we're going to put a marker on there to make sure we know where it goes. Alright, but you want to dry fit that, make sure that's all well and good. If it's too tight, just go ahead and take some sandpaper and sand this out a little bit. Alright, I'm going to take both of those off for just a moment. Okay, so we need a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the aft end here. Okay, and so when we put this one on to glue it, it'll come back here so that the mark is on the aft edge of the ring. Okay, so here, once again, we're going to add some glue. And I'm going to put a ring of glue here just past where that mark is. Now here, try to avoid getting it on the clip itself. I got a little bit there, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything. Okay, now we're going to add the ring with the big notch. We're going to push that back just until we reach our line again, which I don't know if you can see, it's right there. Okay, and then on the back side, I'm going to go ahead and make a fillet here. It doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, and then for my forward ring, I'm going to go ahead and just put some glue right above or forward of the clip there. Okay, we're going to slide that one on. Oop, that's a bit far. Okay, so just so we're right over the end of the clip. I pushed most of my glue out of the way, so go ahead and add some more here. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and also add more glue up here on the forward end. Alright, then we just need to adjust these so that they're perpendicular to the tube. That. Okay. If you want, you can put some another fillet here at the aft end. You can either do this now or wait till you install it, and it's kind of a matter of personal preference. I'm just going to go ahead and do it now and get it over with. Now I do want this to be a little prettier since it will be exposed, so I'm going to go ahead and use my finger here. Now again, we don't want that glue in there. It's not a really big deal because the glue is not going to stick to the metal very well, and it'll pop free. Okay, so at this point we can go ahead and let this dry. I'm going to go ahead and pretty up my fillets a little bit here. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry, and this needs to completely dry before we install it into the body tube. Our next task is to assemble the baffle, and like the motor mount, this comes in its own little sub-kit here. Alright, so just take all those parts out, and remember a lot of times parts are stuck inside other parts. Alright, but we should have two baffle plates, a screw eye, and our coupler. Okay, first thing to do is to mount the screw eye, and here what I'm going to do is, before anything else, I'm going to go ahead and pilot hold this in so it'll self-thread. Now I'm going to put this in till I can see just one full turn of threads over here. You don't want this all the way up to the smooth part, or it's not going to be as strong. Now I'm going to back this out again, and then apply some glue to it. And you should use wood glue for all the steps on this one. Okay, so I'm just going to put a dab of glue on each side. Okay, and I'm going to run that back in. Again, not going all the way through. We want about one full circumference of threads here, and then I'm just going to smooth that in like that. Okay, back here where the screw is coming out, I'm going to leave that kind of globby there because that'll help get rid of the sharp edges there. It's not that big a deal, and in fact the sharp edges won't be exposed to anything once we've got the whole thing installed here, but it's just a matter of preference. Okay, for the other baffle plate here, we're going to start with a thick ring of glue just inside the coupler. Now you don't want it runny, but you do want a good healthy dose of glue around this. Try and keep it off the outside. Okay, Okay, now we're going to take this is the aft baffle plate. I'm going to put that right in there and then push it flush. You can see it'll form a nice fillet of its own just inside there. If you want, you can push this in just a few millimeters and put another layer of glue there, but this should be more than enough. Okay, now for the forward plate that's got the screw eye in it, we're going to use a wider and not as thick bead of glue here. So I'll put the glue in first, and we're going to just widen that out. Okay, and now we're going to put this in kind of at an angle like this. Put it in, and I'm going to give it a little twist as I bring it back out now. Okay, and leave about 2 millimeters there, or roughly 1/16 of an inch, right around the edge. And go ahead and form that into a fillet. Okay. Make sure you haven't clogged up any of the holes there. If you have, just take an applicator and clean that out. But now this also needs to sit and dry completely. While we're waiting for glue to dry on those two sub-assemblies, let's go ahead and install the nose weight. Okay, so there's a fairly big opening in this nose cone. And all we have to do here is, first of all, just stuff it in. Now in the instructions, they recommend forming little peas out of this, or little balls, and sticking them down. It doesn't really matter what shape you've got, just get them down in there. And after you've got 2 or 3 of those in to begin with, then we're going to need to tamp those down. And you can just use a dowel for that. Okay, so just tamp these down so you can get them as far forward into the nose cone as possible. Now you do need to have this weight in there, but you don't necessarily have to use the plasticine clay. Some people like to use BBs and then coat them with a layer of epoxy, but you need at least 14 grams of weight, additional weight here in the nose cone. So everything's pushed down inside there. If you're worried about it coming loose, and I looked at, when I was putting this in, it looked like it may try and pop loose again, but I think it's in there. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. But if you're having troubles with it, or if you're just worried about it coming loose, once you got it in there, you can put in just flow in a layer of epoxy, or even just carpenter's glue. Okay. The only drawback then, it's going to take longer for that to dry. While we're working on the nose cone, I also want to bring your attention to the nose cone construction itself. This is 3D printed, so it's going to have these ridges from the printing process, and then this one also has a fairly noticeable seam here. So in some models, I actually like to keep the ridges if they're nice and uniform and don't have a lot of detraction. But in this case, with this big seam here, I'm going to want to sand it. And so I'm going to start off with 120 grit sandpaper and mainly knock down that seam. Okay, we've also got some little dips in here. We can fill those in with primer later on. Now you can wet sand this if you like, as long as your paper is rated for it. And in wet sanding, the water kind of lubricates both the plastic and the sandpaper, and so you usually get a finer finish, and you also don't clog up the sandpaper as much. For this initial sanding, I'm just going to dry sand it here, and I'm now going to take this all the way around. But after that, I'll go off camera and do some wet sanding with finer grit sandpapers. Okay, so that's knocked down the big imperfections. And as I said, I'm going to give this some finer sanding. And then also I'm going to spray this with a filling primer that will help fill in the smaller grooves here that the sandpaper's not knocking out. Here's my nose cone after it has been sanded and then primed with a filling sandable primer, and then sanded again with 220 grit sandpaper. And you can see the gray here is where it has filled in the low spots, and then the sandpaper has removed the high spots there, and that's where you see more of the white. So now I'm going to give this one more coat of primer. I'll probably use a white primer this time, and then I'm going to give it its final coat of gloss white, as shown in the instructions and in the box cover. One of the aft fins arrived broken in the kit, and rather than having them send me a new one, I'm just going to repair this. So use a little bit of white glue, or wood glue actually. White can be used, but wood's better. And we're just going to put a very thin bead along the brake here. And the brake also had this little corner there. We want to make sure we fix that. Okay. But we want just enough to fill the broken area, and we don't want a lot of excess on there. Now I'm just going to put these two together. And I'm doing this on a piece of wax paper so it doesn't stick. Okay, and now I can just smooth any excess glue in there. Okay, we'll turn that over, and that shows us a little bit of offset, so I can just fix that a little so everything's got a nice even edge to it. And I'm just going to let that sit for about an hour. Now if it looks like it's going to bow up on you, you can put a little weight on top of that. In fact, I can do that here. I'm going to take this battery pack and put it on top. Okay, we give that about an hour, and then we should be able to go back to working on the kit. The glue on my motor mount and on my ejection baffle is dry, so we can install both of these. I'm going to start with the motor mount here, and we want to make sure we're on the aft end. So there's my aft mark once more. And first I'm just going to dry fit this and make sure we don't hang up anywhere. Okay, that all looks pretty good. And so what we're going to do is first put a ring of glue, 70 millimeters or 2 3/4 inches into the body tube. And for this you'll want to use the applicator that came with the kit. Okay, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to find the tip of my applicator there and put it at 7 centimeters, which is 70 millimeters, in my thumbnail right down there at the edge. Okay, and I'm going to give a healthy dose of glue on my applicator, and I'm going to stick this up the aft end without touching anything until my thumbnail hits, and then bring it up against the inside edge and rotate that glue around. Okay, we can check down inside there. That looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to insert this part way and now put another bead of glue just inside the body tube here. And as you turn it over, just move that engine tube out of your way. Okay, we do want a nice even bead of glue all the way around, so make sure you don't have any skips and such here. Okay, now I'm going to turn my engine mount around until I am lined up with the launch lug lines. They're very faint there, but I like to have my engine clip on the same line as my launch lugs. And I'm just going to push this in quickly. Alright, and you'll feel the glue grab, and then the motor mount should be flush with the body tube. So you can just take a straight edge here and use that to push it flush. Okay, and then if you like, you can go ahead and put in a fillet of glue around the edge there for some added strength. Just like that. Okay, now I'm going to, looks like I did glue a little bit there. Okay, so go ahead and make sure that clip moves freely there. Okay, and then going to the opposite end, for this we're going to need the balsa spacer here, and we're going to use this to push the baffle down inside. First we need to attach the shock cord to the baffle. So you're just going to tie this on with a double knot or 2 half hitches. Okay, pull it from all directions to make sure it's well seated on there. All right, and this little free end here, cut that back to 1/4 inch or about 6 millimeters, but not all the way to the knot. And then just take a small amount of glue here and apply it to the knot. I'm just going to work that in. We are ready to install the baffle. Now, according to the instructions, we're supposed to put a thin ring of glue about 5.5 inches inside the forward end here. All right, so down in there. And another ring about 1 inch deeper. Now, you'd have to be really careful on this because I've actually done this once already, and the glue grabbed too early, and that's as far as I could get my baffle down in there. It's only about 2.5 inches. There's not enough room in here for the parachute and the nose cone and everything to go in, so I had to get another kit to try this again. Okay, now it may be that I used too much glue, or it may be that it wasn't far enough down. So what I'm going to do here is take my applicator, and I'm going to reach that as far in as I can and go all around there just once. All right, I'm not going to apply a second application. All right, now this is going to go in with the shock cord facing outward. Okay, and then we're going to take this spacer, we're going to push that in. All right, now I'm already feeling that grab again, but that should go in until it's flush, like there. Okay, so that's, I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's where it's supposed to be, is all the way down there. Now, if you're worried about whether or not you got enough glue, you can take some more glue here and carefully make a fillet around the edge of the baffle. You have to be careful that you don't get glue into the baffle holes, though, or it's not going to work correctly. All right, but we definitely don't want that baffle coming loose and shooting up through the rest of the rocket. Okay, and now you probably can't see down in there, it's too far down. But now it's got some glue around the edge of the baffle as well. And I can just let this dry now. The baffle is drying inside the body tube, and while that's happening, we can turn our attention toward the fins. So we have 2 sets of fins here. These are the main forward fins. And as you can see, you can taper these here by using this guide, or you can simply round the edges. Okay, and that's kind of up to you. On mine, I'm going to round the edges just because it gives me a little more strength. Now on the aft fins, these are nearly square. They're just a little bit elongated. And the way to tell here where you're orienting, all right, is the wood grain here should be parallel to the leading edge and perpendicular to the root edge here. Okay, the diagram here is actually not quite the same size as the fins actually are. And they suggest rounding the forward and trailing edges here, the leading and trailing edges of the small fins, the aft fins, and then either tapering or rounding the leading edges of the main fins, and then just leaving the trailing edge of the main fin squared off. Okay. So to start with, I will do this on a main fin first. I'm going to start with 150 grit sandpaper. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is just going to knock down the edge on both sides so that it's no longer a sharp edge there. Alright, and then either by moving the fin or moving the sandpaper or both here, now I just go back and forth and kind of rotating it in and out to impart a curve to it. Change sides, do some more. Alright, and frequently come back and look at the edges in cross section. So right now this edge is really lopsided. We need a little more on this side. Okay, you can see the brown from the laser cutter is almost gone there. Okay, it's a little bit lopsided yet. We can do a little more here to kind of even that out. Alright, and then for the very leading part here, I'm just going to knock those over. Alright, and just give that a quick curvature there. Okay, so that's one of the forward fins. And again, the trailing edge of the forward fin can just be left square. You might want to remove the soot there. Alright, and then for an aft fin here, you might even want to just take a pencil and make a little mark next to the root edge so you know how to orient your fin. And for this one, I'm just going to round both the leading and trailing edges. Okay, that gets it done fairly quickly there. Needs a little more. Okay, so that's all you need there. If you want, you can take the tip edge and just, again, remove a little bit of that soot. Same with the root edge. Alright, and now I just need to do the same thing to the remaining 3 fins in each set. And I'll do that off camera. I have my fins sanded, and before I put them on the rocket, I'm going to use some sanding sealer here. This is a water-based polyurethane sanding sealer. Many of the big manufacturers make this. Varathane makes one. Minwax makes one. There's several of them out there. And to do this, what I'm going to start with here is I'm going to take the root edge of one of my fins, and I'm going to put a long straight pin in here. You don't need to push it in very far, but you want the length for a handle. Now, I use dissection pins because I'm actually a biologist and I have lots of these around. You can also use a thin dressmaker's pin as well. And then I'm just going to use a cotton swab here as an applicator. And then this thing is a cheap rocket stand. I want it right now for the corrugated edge here, because we'll use this to hold the fins up and out of the way as they're drying. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead here and add this. Now some people like to glue the fins on and then do sanding sealer. I think it's easier to break them while sanding that way, so I prefer to do this beforehand. Alright, now the heaviness of the coat is going to depend on how porous the wood is. You don't want it running, but you do want to saturate the grain here. And what this is doing is filling in the low spots in the grain, and then when we sand it, we'll sand off the high spots, leaving the low spots behind. And you can do this multiple times, depending on how smooth you want to get your fins and how porous the fins are. So really porous fins are going to require more. But it's usually better to do this in a couple of thin coats rather than trying to dump a whole bunch on, because it'll end up just running off anyway. This will also help tie down little fibers that you might have along edges like I've got here. All right, it'll make those easier to sand without making even more fibers. And if you really don't care what your fins look like, you can just do this or not do this and just go ahead and glue the raw fins on there. But you will have a grainier finish unless you apply a whole lot of primer. All right, so that's one of the leading or the forward fins, and I'm just going to stick that pin in to one of the corrugations and it'll just hang there. For the aft fins here, we're going to do the same thing. All right, so again, I'm going to put a fin into the root, or put a pin into the root edge of the fin. Okay, and the same way, we're just going to coat this. Try and keep it off the root edge because we want that to be nice and porous to glue on. But everything else, go ahead and just seal it up. And this usually takes about an hour to dry to the point where it's sandable. And that will vary depending on the humidity and temperature in which you're doing this. Okay, so there are two examples. I'll do all the other fins off camera, and we'll come back to this once I have sanded them, reapplied another coat if I need to, and sanded them again. So when we come back, I'll have these completely finished and ready to mount. My fins have all had 2 coats of sanding sealer, and I've done a final sanding with 220 grit sandpaper on them. So I'm ready to glue these on. Now I'm going to use this fin alignment guide to help ensure that I get the fins straight, since we do have 2 fins and they're supposed to align perfectly. Now you can do this freehand, and I've done it before, but this just makes things easier. But it means I need to put the aft fins on first, followed by the forward fins, and then the launch lugs. Okay, so initially though, all I need to do is just find my fin markings. And remember that these are etched in, although they're very faint. And earlier we sanded these a little bit so that they'll attach well. Now I'm just going to take some wood glue here. Okay, and I'm going to apply a thin film onto the root edge here of one of the aft fins. And now I'm going to press that against here. Now the end of the fin should be flush with the end of the body tube there. Okay, and I'm going to take that back off, and I'm going to allow that to become tacky for about 60 seconds. Okay, we've had a little time go by here, and now I'm going to put this right back on there. And the glue is now a little bit tackier, so I can stick that on, and when I let go, it'll still stay in place. Alright, now we just need to sight down the tube. Make sure that is straight and perpendicular. And now I can put my fin alignment guide on here. This particular one is made by R.E.A.R. There are others out there. R.E.A.R makes theirs for specific body tube sizes. And since Rocketarium has the majority of their rockets in a BT60 size, if you're going to build a lot of them, this is a good investment. Alright, I'm going to let that dry for about 10 minutes, and then I'll continue around the rocket until all the aft fins are installed. My aft fins have glued enough that we can move things forward. I'm just going to move my guide here a bit. And initially I'm just going to kind of gently lay it on the forward edge of the aft fins there to use as an alignment. Now my forward fins are going to go on in the same fashion. So once again we'll just give them a nice even coating of glue here. Okay, and once more now I'm going to find that line, which at the moment is right at the edge here. I'm going to scoot this forward just a little bit more. Now I'm going to scoot it back a little more. The reason I'm having trouble seeing the edge there. There it goes. Okay. So I've got that on that etched line again. I'm going to pull this back off like I did before. Wait 30 to 60 seconds and then come back and put it back on. Alright, my glue has had a little time to dry, so now I'm going to come back, and you'll notice I've scooted the fin alignment guide forward here so it's not in my way. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and scoot that over the forward end of the fin there, leaving quite a bit behind. And this way I can still do a manual check to ensure that I am aligned with the aft fin there. Okay, and that all looks pretty. I'm going to give this just a little bit of a twist. Okay, and as before, give about 5 to 10 minutes for each fin to dry and then move on to the next one. And I will do that again off camera. The glue on my fins is dry, and those came out pretty close to even. Alright, there's just a little bit off on this one, but unless you're really looking for it, it's hard to tell. So now we're going to add the launch lugs. And so those, if you recall, are pre-etched into here where they go. And we already roughened that up with a little bit of sandpaper. So now we just need to take the launch lugs themselves and glue those on. Here again we can use white glue or wood glue. Okay, and again we don't want a whole lot of glue here, just make a nice even bead there. And then we're going to attach these so the aft one goes flush with the body tube. Alright, and then just make sure that's all aligned. So once you've got it on there, you can sight down the rocket, and the launch lug should be in parallel with the body tube and not canted at all. Okay, and then once you've got that one on, we'll put the second one on. Okay, same way, this is going to go into the marked spot on the body tube. Alright, now we're going to sight down this, and we want this to be not only parallel to the body tube, but in line with the aft launch lug. So you should be able to sight this like a gun sight all the way down. If you want some additional straight edge guiding, if you have a piece of a 1/8 inch launch rod, you can slide that in here and use that to straighten it. Just be careful, as if you bump it at all, it'll pull the launch lugs off while it's still inserted there. So do be careful if you want to use that method. I'm going to let this dry, and when we come back, we'll put fillets on everything. The glue on the launch lugs is dry, and we're ready to put the fillets on. And I'm going to start with the launch lugs, because they're going to be a little bit more difficult to get my fingers into. Just run a bead of glue there on either side, and then we'll just smooth that in. Okay. And here, if you want extra built-up fillets, it's better to do them in several layers rather than trying to do it all at once. As if you do it all at once, they're going to tend to run or bulge or have bubbles in them. Okay, you want to make sure you got a paper towel or a rag or some tissues here to wipe your fingers on. Okay, now for the fins, I do 2 facing fins at a time. I'm going to start with the forward fins here. And as long as you keep the rocket horizontal, you can go ahead and do all of your fillets at once. You just don't want to have it standing up so the fillets run down toward gravity there. Alright, I've got enough here that I can probably go ahead and do the aft fin there with the excess from the forward fin. Okay, that looks pretty good there. So I will allow this to dry completely before moving on to our next step.